360-90 degree triangle has the 30-degree angle we want. So let's say that we've looked at it, and right there it is. Now there's no way that you can just take your knife and go up against this little piece of plastic here and just start cutting. Matter of fact, my tip's gone down here, it would end up, and the most important thing on a radial match is to keep those tips. So really, a better way to do it would be to take a pencil, a white pencil, and some on walnut here, but mark out your angle. Now remember, when we get done, that means our table is only going to be, so big. So if you want to make a big table, then you're going to have a big packet of veneer that you're working off of. But usually most of our tables are smaller. Okay, so now I've got my shape drawn on here. I'll just use this to kind of give us a little bit better view of what it looks like. Okay, so there it is. To cut, the key is to keep the tip. Now, for me, when I make these things, I get the absolute best radial matches you've ever seen. I cheat at it, though. Again, I packetize it. So what I would do at this point in time is put a couple pieces of particle board on the top and bottom, go through and staple around the outside edges so that I don't put any in my good part at all. So you can see how well it's held, how tight it is. I go to the bandsaw. I'd cut this edge a little bit away from my pencil mark. Go to my edge sander, wherever you guys got your edge sander. I see it over there. And I'd sand this one side. There's nothing better than a sanded edge of veneer. Nothing better than sanded veneer. So now this one side's sanded, but it's a little bit loose because I cut off all those staples. So I'll come back and wrap my tape around this side, holding it tight. Then I'll go back over to the bandsaw again, and now I'll cut this side and then sand that. And then I can pop it back apart, and every one of them is right on the money. But most people don't have edge sanders. So once it's marked out, I'll just take a straight edge, and I'll go way beyond the tip, and I'll start my cut all the way up here. Okay, and I'll make my cuts. And this would be a better place to use something like a Stanley utility knife because it won't flex as much, because we're going to cut literally through all these pieces. People who come to my class when we do my veneering, they do it with an X-Acto knife because that's the tool I tell them to bring. And that's okay, but you just got to take your time until you get all the way through. So you just keep making more and more cuts. You concentrate on keeping your knife straight up and down. Again, this would be much, much better. But once I get through all of these on this one side, then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over. I'll take some tape if I can and re-tape it back together on that side. And I'll come back through and I'll position myself up to make my next cut to where, I have to do this, I'm doing it left-handed here, but again, I want to start my cut going into my tip and not let my knife come out of my tip, again, because I don't want to lose a tip. So now I'll come back and I'll make all these cuts until I get all the way through. Now I'll end up with 12 pieces that look pretty much like this. The top piece might be a little narrower, the bottom piece might be a little bit wider, and they won't go together quite right. There's a couple little catches. The first one is, before you move on, the absolute best thing to do is to take a sanding block. Again, it's just a block of wood with some contact on sandpaper. One side's got a coarser side than the other. And at this point in time, with all of my veneers that have been cut, I'll take my straight edge and just hold up to keep them compressed down, and then I'll take this, and it'll ride right on my table, and it'll stay at 90 degrees, and I'll just take that up against the edge. But again, it's very important that I'm not just sanding these where they're flopping in the wind. Again, my straight edge will hold them down flat while I go through and sand. And I'll sand until all of those pieces look good and tight and clean and straight. It's a very easy and visual thing to do. Then I'll go back, and if you look here, you can see that definitely, they're all nice and flat and straight and in line. After I cut it with an X-Acto knife, they won't look that way. And I want to sand them until they come back to looking like that. Now, the issue, a couple of things. What do you think the chances are that when I drew this out and I cut it, that I'm going to get exactly 30 degrees? You know how you guys struggle, you sit there and you try to figure out how to set up exactly a 90-degree angle or a 45-degree angle. We can't get there. So the same thing for me, trying to think I'm going to get this at exactly 30 degrees isn't going to happen. What I need to do is I need to cut each one of those to like 31 degrees, just a little bit over. So if this is my angle, when I go to cut, I'll cut right on my pencil line here, but I'll cut a little bit further away down here on this side, just a fraction of an inch. But I definitely want the widest part of it to be wider than narrower. What do you think the chances are by the time I go through of taking, again, this first piece, by the time I get all the way around, this last piece fitting perfectly in? None. So when we put this thing together, we're going to put it together in halves. So as you take your packet of 12 pieces apart, remember we numbered them before with a piece of chalk, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down. If you start here and you take your first piece, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, what ends up happening is you put your very first piece on the top of that pile next to the very bottom piece right here at this seam. And with all of the veneers, the pattern changes from the top to the bottom. So there's no way this joint here is going to look right. We have to rotate, even and odds. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So now nowhere in our grouping are we more than 2 pieces away from where they were in the original cutting of the log. There's one other thing. What you saw in the mirror when we looked at it was a book-matched image, so every other piece has to be flipped. And it doesn't matter which one. You can start anywhere you want, but if you're going to start anywhere, you have to make sure that every other piece gets rotated upside down to get exactly what you saw. If you don't, you'll end up with a slip match look, which is really cool, but it's not what you saw in the mirror. What we'll do when we put this together is we put 2 halves together. Okay, so let's just say that this is 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and 11, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So the idea is, the hope is, by the time we get done, this is a little bit wider, and this is a little bit wider, and this is a little bit wider, and this is a little bit wider here, because we tried to have 30.5 degrees. So now this half and this half, we'll bring them and lap them over and cut both pieces at one time together, hopefully not cutting off the tips. But if it was the other way around, if our angles were a little bit short, then we end up with 2 halves that end up with this type of shape, and when we overlap them, we end up cutting away our tips as to having them where they come over. So now it makes it a lot easier to maintain your tips when you overlap your 2 pieces.